I love handheld gaming, yet despite Nintendo being mine and many others' gateway to portable systems, I've always had a soft spot for Sony's offerings. While both the PSP and the DS did the same thing fundamentally, there was always a particular charm to PlayStation's handheld efforts and their goal of bringing console quality gaming on the go, and nowhere was that more evident than their last dedicated handheld, the PS Vita, an ambitious failure that to this day has a cult-like following and many wishing for Sony to return to this era. So with the recent PS Portal update and rumoured handheld functionality for the PS6, I thought what better time to take a look at their ill-fated handheld and see if maybe there was anything Sony could learn from it. Rumours of a PSP successor began as early as 2008, but it was only by 2010 we saw anything concrete. NetherRealm Studios confirmed the existence of a PSP2 dev kit at PAX that year, along with rumours throughout the industry of a system with dual analog sticks, front and rear touchscreens, as well as similar functionality to phones and tablets. While Sony were quick to deny rumours, they would present two potential designs for a PSP follow-up internally. We'd even get to see one of these prototypes with the sliding design akin to the PSP Go, as leaked images would be published by VGC, with the writer of that article, Patrick Garrett, reporting it would also include an HD screen and have twice as much RAM as an Xbox 360. However, as both Sony and Garrett would clarify, these were not final designs, as they had a tendency to overheat, with some speculation even suggesting that Sony abandoned the sliding design in an effort to combat the issue. However, Sony continued to not acknowledge any of the industry rumblings about a PSP2 to an infuriating degree. Kinda like when someone you know shows up in an outfit they've never worn before and it's too much of a departure from their normal fit, and they expect you not to make any comments.
Fine, I was trying something and it didn't work.
The closest Sony would get to acknowledging their secret love child prior to Kendrick rapping about it was during a 2010 New York Times interview with Kaz Hirai. The games being played on Android and Apple platforms are fundamentally different from the world of immersive games that PlayStation aims for. You can definitely play immersive games better with physical buttons and pads. The threat of smartphone gaming is a common thread you'll see in early Vita coverage, with many speculators noting how handheld gaming was in direct competition with that market. However, Hirai reassured that any PSP successor would be first and foremost a gaming machine. That said, Sony was still actively refuting the existence of a PSP successor. That is until the 27th of January 2011, when they would officially reveal the device behind closed doors, along with its codename, Next Generation Portable, or NGP for short. They'd also confirm many of the rumored features and reveal their new flash memory cards that boasted high read-write speeds and would ultimately replace the PSP's UMD format. Shuhei Yoshida even boasted that the handheld would be on par with the 7th gen home consoles. However, this was a bit of a reach and they did walk back on it pretty quickly. Some people in the press have said, wow, this thing could be as powerful as a PS3. Well, it's not going to run at 2 GHz because the battery would last 5 minutes and it would probably set fire to your pants. While it may not have been a PS3 in your pocket, it was probably for the best. I mean, could you imagine the commercials? PlayStation. Regardless, it would undeniably be the most powerful handheld on the market. So you can imagine the excitement that year at E3 when Hirai would take to the stage and finally revealed the PlayStation Vita. Now I know I have a reputation for messing with footage for my own sick gratification, but this is real. It was primarily born from Sony's decision to have AT&T as the sole provider for Vita's 3G service, a decision I still find kinda head-scratching 15 years later. The only reason I could see them both teaming up is that they seem to have similar cybersecurity protocols, as in a total lack of them. But it wasn't the only issue people had prior to the system's release. As stated earlier, the system would move away from the PSP's UMD physical format. This meant that the Vita was completely incompatible with its predecessor's library, leading to the creation of the UMD Passport program. This service allowed you to pay the equivalent of $5 to $10 to get a digital copy of a physical game you already owned. The issue was, this program was exclusive to Japan. As Yoshida explained in a Wired Q&A, the service would remain exclusive to Japan, as Western owners were more likely to buy games digitally. However, as Twice the Bits notes in an article from earlier this year, most users still preferred to buy games physically at this time, which was why the digital-only PSP Go was a massive flop. Another issue was the proprietary memory cards. While the PSP had used a Sony created format, the difference was that the Memory Stick Duo worked with a range of Sony products. Cameras, phones, and whatever MP3 player they had fooled themselves into thinking could beat the iPod. Like that weird looking pill thing from Persona 3. How am I supposed to listen to music without a screen that's playing Minecraft parkour while an AI reads a stolen Reddit post? What am I supposed to do? Actually digest an album?
The women at my job made a list of the most attractive guys and I wasn't even in the top 10 when there are only 8 guys here.
Thank God we don't have to live like that anymore. Sony would defend their new format in an interview with Gamasutra, explaining they were primarily chosen to combat the widespread piracy the PSP saw during its life, which at one point they had described as sickening. They also claimed these new memory cards were far superior to alternatives on the market, and described both the cards and the Vita itself as a premium product. However, that in itself was a concern for some. The Vita is a fantastic piece of hardware. The question is there even a need in the marketplace for a very specialized portable device of that capability? That's a quote from Bobby Kotick, who the writer denies being the epitome of corporate evil. How innocent we were back in 2011. Now, Kotick may be a lot of things, but he has a point. Nintendo, who had dominated the handheld market, were struggling to attract even a fraction of smartphone gaming, forcing them to drastically cut the price of the 3DS. The Vita was met with similar concerns prior to release over its price, which was only aggravated by their proprietary storage costing between $45 to $120. To put it in perspective, the same year the Vita was set to release, the base PS3 had received a price cut, bringing it down to $250. Sure, the Vita was a handheld boasting console quality games on the go, but its console level prices were a bitter pill to swallow. In fact, research firm Strategy Analytics predicted that if Sony had reduced the average price of the Vita to match the 3DS, they could move 12.4 million systems and make $2.2 billion. So at this point the question needs to be asked, was there anything to actually like about the Vita?
Yes.
In 2012 we'd finally get the specs for the system alongside some hands-on coverage prior to its Western release, and early impressions were solid. Whether or not the current naysaying surrounding the Vita's mass commercial appeal have any merit, it can still stand proud as an enthusiast gamer's dream handheld. Morgan wasn't alone, as many early reviewers who had imported the Vita were very impressed with the system, awarding it scores in the 8 to 9 range, with Richard Leadbetter claiming that the system had one of the strongest launch lineups of any game system ever. While that may sound like heresy, it's hard to argue when you really take a step back and look at what the Vita offered in its release window. Virtua Tennis, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Uncharted Golden Abyss, Wipeout 2048, Everybody's Golf, and Lumines to name a few. Whether or not it was one of the best launch lineups ever is ultimately a question for boring streamers stuck for content to figure out in a tier list, but it was undeniably more stocked than most, and not something many recent consoles can boast. I mean, a week after people finished Demon's Souls on the PS5, they were acting like the console library ceased to exist.
I have nothing left except Spider-Man.
He saved your life, sir.
Now admittedly, there's nothing as immediately iconic as Breath of the Wild or Demon's Souls, but the sheer volume of games available at launch no doubt helped boost confidence in the system. This influx of content was due to Sony actively pursuing more seamless development cycles for the Vita, and collaborating with developers in order to achieve that goal. In fact, it seemed to have been somewhat of a mission statement for the device. As Sony's Kish Harani noted in a 2011 keynote, the Vita was designed by developers for developers, something Stuart Lovegrove of Studio Liverpool would echo during a Eurogamer interview. We developed our game completely in parallel with the hardware, from the beginning ideas of the device all the way up until the hardware launched. Our game became a bit of a testbed for the device, which benefits all internal Sony groups. Sony had actively learned from the PS3's mistakes and made the Vita far more developer friendly. The system's ARM-based architecture made ports of PS3 games massively more streamlined, and Lovegrove even compared development pipelines on Vita to that of consoles, which no doubt helped attract major industry players like Ken Levine. With great first impressions, a strong launch lineup, and an ecosystem that actively promoted game development, it was no wonder Sony was so confident that the Vita could succeed. I am incredibly confident that when people get this thing in their hands, they're going to be thrilled beyond belief with what it is they're playing, and they're going to realize that this is something they haven't experienced before.
Dude, check the news. It doesn't matter what channel.
I'd love to say that the Vita's decline was a slow realization, but that would be like when my mum calls me handsome. A lie. In its Japanese launch week, it sold 325,000 consoles. However, less than a week later, sales numbers had fallen 78%. A drop in sales is to be expected, however, such a dramatic decline was unheard of. NBC's Kyle Orland even noted that the 3DS had only seen a 44% drop post-launch and moved 50,000 more systems. In fact, the week Vita dropped was one of the 3DS's best weeks to date in Japan. This was a massive departure to the PSP's launch, where the system had completely sold out in its first day, and things wouldn't get better as the Vita moved west. Analyst Nick Parker theorized the system only moved about 61,000 units in the UK and only 200,000 in the US, with this trend continuing as the Vita entered 2013. Sony themselves would revise sales projections for the system twice that year and would eventually start only reporting combined sales for the Vita and PSP, which is not a sign of confidence, like when people on dating apps post group photos. I'm just saying, if everyone in that picture isn't showing up and speaking in unison with a shared consciousness, your account should be banned.
We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking for something pretty serious too. The Vita was doing so badly, it actually began to lose games, many of which were some of the PSP's biggest titles, like Monster Hunter, which had really helped the system succeed in Japan and Europe, being the most notable. In fact, when asked about the possibility of the series coming to the Vita, Capcom president Haruhiro Sugimoto had this to say: "No, we're only thinking about getting the game in lots of 3DS owners' hands and having it become a hit." It wasn't just Monster Hunter either. Titles announced for the Vita, such as the exclusive BioShock spin-off, were quietly cancelled, and third-party support began to fade. Sony quickly pivoted their strategy with the system to claw back sales, positioning it as a peripheral for the then upcoming PS4, and even bundling it with that console in Europe. However, by 2015, Sony Computer Entertainment Senior VP Masayasu Ito announced that there would be no more first-party games for the Vita, and at this point, Sony had shifted all its efforts to the PS4. By 2018, Sony would cease production of the system's cartridges, and in 2019 would end production of the device itself. To contrast this, the PSP and PS3 continued production for a decade after launch, whereas the Vita barely lasted half that time. But the question is, what happened? While Sony did try to explain away the price of their memory cards as superior products, this was sadly not the case. These are premium priced products that do not appear to be offering any kind of performance advantage over the standard SD micro SD cards. Indeed, based on our initial testing, the speed of these cards actually seems to be rather slow. Again, some of these could cost as much if not more than the games themselves, meaning you had to choose. Do you buy a game or the space to store it on? Which is a weird position to put consumers in, as PlayStation makes their money from console software sales, and even the claim that this new physical media would help combat piracy was disproven a mere 3 months after launch. Even if you could settle for one of the smaller cards, you didn't have anything to play. A major meme that surrounded Vita's early life was that it had no games. Now, while the launch lineup was indeed stacked, weeks if not months could go by without a major title hitting the system. For example, Gravity Rush, one of the most notable titles, dropped 4 months after launch with very little in between, and Persona 4 Golden would follow a similar pattern. While the system was bolstered with ports and remasters, the issue was many of these were in a better form factor on home console, and the limited number of original titles that did release failed to galvanize the system for many consumers. Vita does have Uncharted Golden Abyss, a great launch title that's still its best-selling game, but Sony hasn't identified, either from its extensive roster of internal studios or from an outside source, that one killer app that will justify a Vita for millions and millions of could-be owners. Nothing quite became synonymous with the Vita in the same way Monster Hunter did for its predecessor, or the likes of Pokemon, Fire Emblem, or Mario Kart did for its competitor. Couple that with the device's high price to entry, and it's no wonder people gave it a pass. So in September 2013, Sony would release a new model of the Vita, the PS Vita 2000, aka the Slim, and the PS TV would release a year later. These were more budget-friendly options of the PS Vita, with the Slim model being around $200 and the PS TV half that. However, true to the Vita's nature, they came with their own issues. While the Slim had improved battery life and was even more portable, it removed the OLED screen from the original model, which was one of the best things about it. The TV, on the other hand, was essentially a Vita with video out, but because of that, it lacked the original system's extra functionality, meaning some games such as Killzone Mercenary needed to be patched to work on a regular controller. It is admittedly a little more clunky than playing on the handheld, but it does work, and without it you wouldn't be seeing any of this footage. Original hardware, baby! However, despite this, many games were still incompatible with the TV, many of which were the system's biggest titles: Assassin's Creed Liberation, Uncharted Golden Abyss, Gravity Rush, so it didn't feel like a complete standalone system. Put simply, the issue for both revisions was that they cut the wrong things. That's not just my opinion. Shuhei Yoshida, one of the device's biggest cheerleaders, said as much himself to Kinda Funny Games earlier this year, noting that features like the rear touchpad, memory cards, and OLED screen all inflated the system's price. However, of the features I listed, only the OLED screen was removed from future revisions. Not something like the near system, GPS, either the cameras, either the touchpads, or the AR system, all of which were barely used. Sure, cutting them would have affected some games, but was anyone gonna miss Reality Fighters? Gripping stuff. While notable titles like Tearaway relied on many of these features, they seem fine removing them for the PS4 port. It would also give people a reason to hold on to their original PS Vitas while giving a lower cost of entry for more hesitant buyers. And it's not like Sony hasn't gutted major elements for revisions before. I mean, the PSP Street removed stereo audio for God's sakes. But let's say all that extra functionality had to stay. Why then did they not swap from the proprietary memory cards to SD? Like, that's such an easy one. The corrections, while well-meaning, were misguided and even cannibalized their own sales. I mean, there was a reason you could pick up a PS TV for less than half its launch price and people still weren't buying them. So why then, when so many games were underserved by these extra features and they were essentially bloatware, did they so adamantly stick with them? Well, it relates to one of the biggest issues with the system.
What are you doing over there? Are you peacocking right now?
That may sound like a no-brainer. Sony themselves even clarified before the system released that the Vita would be a dedicated handheld instead of a phone gaming hybrid. The issue is everything about the Vita, its press coverage, and its own marketing screamed, "I wanna be a phone!" And I kinda get why they did this. At this time, mobile gaming was seeing a massive influx of players, with over half of smartphone users having at least tried mobile games, and over a third being self-described mobile phone gamers. And given that global ownership of smartphones had doubled between 2010 and 2011 alone, it's no wonder they wanted a slice of that pie. Now, I know many of you may be saying that these smartphone players were young children and women, and that they weren't core gamers. The thing is, that's the demographic you want to crack. The DS and Switch have been so successful because they attract a fraction of that crowd. It is a vastly untapped market, and there's a reason every game company was trying to catch their eye at the time. But the Vita was never going to do that. Smartphone games, from their core concepts and control schemes, are far more intuitive and pick up and play than anything the Vita had to offer. Aside from that, you also had to convince people to ditch their phones for a Vita, or at least downsize to a dumb phone as we call them now. While the Vita had everything expected of a smartphone, save for the ability to call people, it didn't do anything as seamlessly as one. As Eurogamer noted in their review of the Vita, both its browser and email were far more cumbersome and awkward than what you would have found in smartphones at the time. And as noted by David Combs, the cameras on the device would pale in comparison to something like the iPhone. If you need any more evidence of the PlayStation's attempt to attract the smartphone audience, just look at the promo material that emphasized the social aspects of the device. It just reeks of the early 2010s cringy attempts to hammer social media functionality into everything, regardless of whether or not it made any sense.
You're young. You're an intern, right?
Yeah.
You want Soch? You want Soch mead? You want the Soch mead?
It may have been a meme at the time and even now, but the Blizzard guys were right. Everyone had a phone, because you kinda need one, but no one needed a Vita, and it was because of that that smartphone gaming didn't have a cost of entry in the same way Vita did, and Sony became painfully aware of that. People have mobile phones, and it's so easy to play games on smartphones. I hope, like many of you, that this culture of playing portable games continues, but the climate is not healthy for now because of the huge dominance of mobile gaming.
Why do you lie to me, Jeeves? I hate it when you lie.
For anyone that's seen my Wii U video, apologies because we're about to retread some ground here. While Nintendo were struggling with the Wii U throughout its life, the majority of their software and hardware sales were carried by the 3DS. Oh hey look, a portable gaming system! While the 3DS was nowhere near as powerful as the Vita and didn't sell next to near the numbers of the DS, it still sold nearly 76 million units and over 392 million software sales, despite the so-called dominance of smartphone gaming. While both companies did try to improve the public perception of their handhelds, as early as 2014, Sony had started pivoting the Vita to be a PS4 accessory rather than its own system. There was also very little they did to actively promote it. In fact, a lack of any advertising is another major failing of the system. I mean, I knew what it was, but I'm a massive nerd who's resigned himself to never being with a woman, so I don't count. In fact, the only advertising in my neck of the woods that I can recount had to be pulled due to false advertisement claims, so it's not exactly a ringing endorsement. In some ways, it felt like the biggest hindrance to the Vita was Sony themselves. It may just be hindsight, but looking at the timeline and the little they did to help the system, it's like they looked at this machine from day one and had a single thought in their mind.
Come on, Boogie, let's burn this motherfucker down! Come on, Boogie, let's burn this motherfucker down! Let's burn it down! Let's burn it!
To be blunt, the Vita is an undeniable failure in terms of every major goal Sony had set for it, and a lot of people do not look fondly back on it. It is far past time to see that the Vita, despite its fleeting initial potential, was ultimately nothing more than a bomb. It left behind a legacy and library shockingly devoid of meaning, substance, or value. Don't eulogize the PlayStation Vita, bury it. Now everyone's entitled to their opinion, so please respect minors. He's objectively wrong, but still. To say that the system was devoid of meaning, substance, or value is not true. While I do think Sony's pivot to make the Vita an accessory for the PS4 was a bit premature, the shift encouraged them to invest more heavily in low latency streaming, which eventually evolved into the modern PlayStation Plus service, and led to the creation of the PS Portal, which 5% of all PS5 owners have, and was the best-selling accessory of last year. On the value side, Sony were the first to actively try and bridge the gap between a handheld and traditional console gaming design, leading to the more hybridized standard we see today. While the PS TV was needed to display Vita games on an external monitor, the original OLED model had an extra port that was never used and removed for the PS Vita Slim. However, early dev kits reportedly had video out. Now I can't prove that's what this port was intended for, but I can doke stare at it and speculate. I know that you were for video out, I just can't prove it. But I feel there is some merit to the idea, as the PSP had an accessory for video out, so it kind of makes sense. As I mentioned before, Sony actively consulted developers and publishers while creating the tech for Vita to make game creation for the platform easier, a hard-learned lesson from PS3, and one they still continue to employ. Another thing born from the Vita was PlayStation partnering with indie developers, a movement spearheaded almost single-handedly by Shahid Ahmed, who worked 12-hour days and aggravated his type 1 diabetes to secure games for the system, and I can only imagine the reaction to his dedication from the higher-ups who had internally written off the device.
You know, a lot of people have worked really hard. Why?
Ahmed is a bit of an unsung hero in terms of the Vita, and I urge anyone who's a fan of the system to check out this Polygon article about the work he did, which continues to pay off for PlayStation to this day, as Sony continues to pursue indie partnerships, funding many smaller games, and showing off a plethora of indie games during their State of Play shows, and even led to breakout hits like Helldivers 2. These indies would also pursue the hybridization between the Vita and PS4 far more than Sony ever did, through things like cross-buy, which availed you of a game for both Vita and PS4, and allowed you to transfer save data between the two. Games such as Shovel Knight, Fez, Undertale, and more all use this, which was so cool and very pro-consumer. But it also highlights one of the biggest strengths of the system that people kind of glaze over. There may not be a lot of Vitas out there, but the people who do own Vitas are very serious consumers. Outside official releases, it's also seen an extremely dedicated homebrew community, with wholly original games and even native ports of things like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. One homebrew developer developer even celebrated how welcoming and supportive that community is, and they've also retroactively fixed a lot of the issues with the various Vitas. SD to Vita allows you to use an SD adapter in place of the memory cards, there's homebrew to help make the slim model's image quality more in line with the OLEDs, and the PS TV in particular benefits greatly from custom firmware, allowing you to remove the blacklisting, making pretty much every game playable. These fan developers have even re-enabled multiplayer servers for certain titles, and as YouTuber Mystic has shown us, there are still people playing Vita games online to this day. Sure, its library pales in comparison to its predecessor, but there are some real gems here, especially in terms of JRPGs, and even more so when we include the Vita store offering PS1 and PSP games. Speaking of Japan, while the system wasn't a major breakout the world over, it did manage to attract a fan base in Sony's home turf. As The Guardian's Keith Stewart and much of the revised 2000 models advertising suggests, the PS Vita Slim's goal was to attract a more casual audience, and I'd say it had some success in that regard. In 2014, Media Create revealed that the majority of Freedom War sales were primarily to students, and the system saw an uptick in sales with the release of Minecraft, showing that it had resonated with younger consumers. I'm not saying the Vita was a regular sight in Japan, but it was common enough that an NPC in Persona 5 is casually playing one on the subway. Another surprising demographic that took to the device in Japan was women, which is why the system saw a large number of otome games. We've been selecting Vita as our main platform, and I believe that the popularity and high quality of the visuals and sound are also very popular among our female fans. Now you may be looking at this book talk tier content and thinking something along the lines of,
I do not care for hunky boys.
but one of the Vita's main goals was to poach mobile gaming's market, which primarily consisted of women and younger players. So in that regard, I'd say the Vita had some level of success. But if you ask me, the most impressive thing about the Vita was the passion. Those that stuck with it throughout its lifetime became known as Vita Islanders. Content creators like Mystic, That Video Game Show, Too Old for Gaming, and the single most wholesome channel on this hellhole of a site, Food for Dogs, constantly sung the device's praises and no doubt promoted it more than Sony ever did. I finally broke and got mine in 2015 because of videos from Metal Jesus Rocks and Classic Games Room, and the system still sees coverage from big creators, most recently from the likes of Good Vibe Gaming and GameSack. Speaking of GameSack, it's time to shamelessly rip off that video format. I love Sega. Not just Sonic, but Yakuza, Streets of Rage, and Jet Set Radio. Yet, despite my adoration for them, I have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to the Monkey Ball series, which has thankfully changed with Banana Splits, a launch title that fits so perfectly on the handheld with its pick up and play nature. The core premise is easy enough. You're a monkey in a ball. Go figure. And you need to get to the goal before time runs out. However, the track design and the physics make the game far more complex than its initial premise. It is the perfect example of easy to learn, hard to master, and is so addictive. From what I understand though, this is one of the weaker entries in the series and is one of the last original games in the franchise, which is a real shame because if this is considered mid, I can only imagine how good the rest of the games are. If the Vita was good for three things, it would be JRPGs, shmups, and racing games. And of those, Wipeout 2048 is the best one on the system. A prequel to the series, it sees you engage in the first anti-grav racing competitions. But despite its status as a prequel, it still feels like it moves the series forward despite its place in the Wipeout timeline. Ships are broken into three categories with speed, agility, and power, with the latter being slower and combat orientated. Which may sound like an odd choice given this is a game about driving hovercrafts that have an average cruise speed of Mach 2, but the game is made up of more than just races. As you progress through the campaign, you'll constantly revisit tracks with additional challenges, such as eliminations, time trials, and there's one really cool set of challenges where your ship gets progressively faster and only ends when you explode from taking too much damage. All with a cool filter to the level that makes it look like you dropped a ton of LSD before you hopped in the cockpit.
Shapes and colors the likes of which I've never seen.
Not only do these extra challenges add variety to the game, they help solidify your knowledge of the course, which you'll need with how tricky it can be to pilot the ships, especially compared to more traditional racing games. Honestly, if it looks cool, you should check it out, and the music is incredible. Unfortunately, I can't play any of it because it's a lot of licensed stuff, so what you're hearing is from TXK, another great game on the Vita you should also check out. Resistance Burning Skies kicks ass, and it annoys me more people don't talk about it. You play as a firefighter drafted into the Minutemen to fight the Chimera invasion, and I will admit, I did not care about the story at all. In fact, the only reason I remember the main character's name is because it's written on his axe, and the female lead's because he's always saying it, and she's kinda hot. No, the real star of the show is the gameplay. While I can see why Killzone is the more fondly remembered FPS for its multiplayer, and its campaign is way longer, Resistance at its core is more Half-Life than COD, and that's far more my cup of tea. Guns feel super unique, not only from each other, but other FPSs in general, each with some alt-fire or extra ability. From aimbotting laser rifles, a scoped mode that sees and shoots through walls, to even just basic stuff like a grenade launcher, they all feel great to use, and the way the story parcels them out to you lets you get to grips with them at a nice pace, and keeps you playing just to see what new goodies you'll get. While the actual runtime is only around 4 hours, I felt more inclined to return to Burning Skies on a New Game Plus than I did Killzone, and even the touchscreen stuff wasn't too invasive like a lot of other launch titles. Golden Abyss! What's funny is I actually did have to cough there. It just feels super old school and fresh at the same time, kinda like Doom 2016, and makes me wish Resistance would make a comeback. One game I always see in the best of lists for the Vita is Soul Sacrifice. However, for ages I didn't go near it. Most people mention it in the same breath as Monster Hunter, and that's not really my bag. And it had some involvement from Keiji Inafune, whose last game was so bad and underbaked, the Kickstarter for it should be considered embezzlement. To jail with you, sir! It also doesn't do itself any favors with one of the longest, clunkiest openings in any game I've ever played, but I'm really glad I gave the series a shot with its expanded release. Soul Sacrifice Delta is a dark fantasy straight out of the minds of the Brothers Grimm. In fact, I was actually surprised that the narrative was the thing that held my interest the most, as your character is technically not involved in it at all, and you relive the memories of another wizard via a talking journal bound in flesh. Basically, it's Fantasy Quantum Leap, but not as problematic as that show.
I'm gonna say the N-word!
While people usually compare the game to Monster Hunter, and there's no doubt similarities, if anything I think it's closer in tone and vibe to Dark Souls. It's a world without hope where those that wield the same power as you quite literally turn into monsters. You can even level up by sacrificing enemies you kill, absorbing their essence into yourself. It's a wonderfully dark world that feels like a nightmare, and everything from the mechanics to the level and art design really reinforce the vibe. Gameplay is initially simple, with spells being mapped to each of the face buttons, but has surprising depth as each spell falls into certain categories or has additional status effects. On top of that, some spells also work in tandem with one another, adding additional effects which entices you to mix and match, so you're constantly changing your loadout. There's also a ton of content in the various campaigns, and even more when you add in co-op. Honestly, I can see why people really want a proper sequel to this game, and if Freedom Wars getting a PC port is anything to go by, hopefully we get one soon, as it's really addicting and has such a unique charm to it. I love a good rhythm game, but I have a particular soft spot for the Project Diva games, and this may be my favorite. Not only does it have more songs than its follow-up, Project X, it also skips that game's rather poor story mode and focuses solely on the songs, meaning I don't have to take a break from the high-octane rhythm action for kinda just bland character interactions of the Miku crew. F-Second's focus is entirely on the gameplay, and it's all the better and harder for it. Seriously, there are some stages where I was like, how the fuck do people clear this? I also think the music videos look cooler than the sequel, as they actually resemble music video rather than the follow-up's tendency to frame every song like a performance. You can also edit music videos, change performers, and buy new outfits for your virtual pop stars. Now, one critique that I do have is that if you're not into rhythm games, this won't change your mind, as the only other thing it has to offer is a mode where you can pet the characters and give them gifts, but it's kinda creepy as they live in an unfurnished prison cell with multiple cameras that you control. Kinda makes me feel like a serial killer when I'm in this mode, but not a cool, he's like me for real one like Dexter, like an actual one, like Jeffrey Dahmer.
Relax. I just want to take some pictures.
That's the second Dexter reference in this video. I don't even particularly like that show. I do wish I could talk about the music more, but much like Wipeout, I'm pretty sure if I even think about playing it, the rights holders will kill me. I guess that's technically thinking about it.
FBI, open up!
Get on the ground now! The guy wants to move on the ground! Don't reach!
Honestly, you could substitute this pick with any of the Vanillaware games on Vita, and most of them are here. Not to say that they're all interchangeable, they're just all as good. I went with Muramasa Rebirth because it's the definitive version of that game and is still exclusive to the Vita, which is kind of a stipulation I had for the games I picked in this section. A cross between Metroidvania and a character action game but in 2D, you play as Momohime, a noble woman possessed by the soul of an assassin by the amnesiac ninja Kisuke. While they do occasionally intersect and certain characters show up in each story, you could play one without the other and get a whole narrative. But the presentation is so good, I can't imagine you stopping after finishing one campaign. Speaking of the story, it's presented almost like a traditional Japanese play, and the enemies range from samurai and ninja to more supernatural entities like Kappa and other yokai. If you haven't played a Vanillaware game before, this is a great place to start, and unlike the Wii version, there's DLC with more playable characters, and the visuals aren't as muddy as that version, making this the best way to experience what's essentially an interactable traditional Japanese painting. Now I will say it does require some grinding as the enemy difficulty can get a bit crazy, but it's a great time, and if you like what you see, you should give it a try. It fires on all cylinders so much it's easy to overlook some of the other great aspects. Like the OST, this one I can talk about, and should, cause it's amazing. Listen to this. Alright, I have to stop myself there because I'll just go on. And Vita diehards will note I missed a lot of obvious games like Gravity Rush, Persona 4 and Tearaway, but they have ports on PS4 so I couldn't justify getting a Vita specifically for them. That said, there are still so many games exclusive to Vita, I could go on and never really find a natural stopping point, which is not something I could say about the Wii U when I did my video on that. Many exclusives such as Killzone, Uncharted and Tainted Bloodlines are all still locked to this platform, and the digital store, as of writing this, is still up, and you can still buy games for the system at a reasonable price. So there's still some merit to owning a Vita today. I will admit I'm biased as I own 3 of them, but there's something special about the Vita. While many talk about it in the same breath as the Wii U, if anything it feels closer to the Dreamcast, an ambitious system that had some revolutionary ideas but failed to resonate with a wider audience. And yet it still felt like anything was possible on it. From new IPs to final entries and now dormant franchises, and they both had Jet Set Radio. There's also something so undeniably charming about the Vita. From its funky customizable home menu, its ambitious original games, to its infectiously passionate fan base. It's also somewhat of a swan song for handheld gaming, as hybrid consoles now dominate the market. I'm not saying we need to go back to dedicated handhelds, but I do miss the particular vibe that they had, especially the Vitas. For years, this was my go-to handheld and was always in my bag, only being replaced recently by the Steam Deck. It's where I cut my teeth on game collecting, and it was the system I got with money from my first job. I've taken this system with me through college and across the planet, and it's still one I keep coming back to. Whether it be for random games I missed, revisiting Inaba and Persona 4 Golden, or even to revisit classic PSP and PS1 games. Even for this video, there's something I can't quite put my finger on that keeps me playing. I guess what I'm trying to say is, did you know Vita means life? Hey guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you think of the Vita. Did you have one? Do you hate me? Are you concerned with all the Gunnar games on it? Because there's a lot. I know literally none of you asked for this video, but a buddy of mine really wanted to see it, so I hope you're happy now, Sean. Anyway, I'm gonna go play more Ghost of Sparta on my PS Vita, because that game rocks. Don't forget to drink some water, and maybe check out some of my other videos while you're here. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.